The most advanced starship ever built sat motionless in the docking bay of Station Alpha, its sleek silver hull gleaming under the harsh station lights like a monument to failure. The ship, designated as the Phoenix 1, represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering, a perfect fusion of technology from 100 different worlds. Yet for all its sophistication, its engines remained cold and silent. For 3 months, the best alien engineers from across the galaxy had tried and failed to make the ship's experimental drive system work. The ship's AI was perfect, the calculations were flawless, but something was missing. Captain James Smith watched from the observation deck, his weathered face reflecting in the reinforced glass. He ran a calloused hand through his graying hair, a habit from his 30 years of spaceflight that had never quite gone away. As the last human captain in the Galactic fleet, he had been called in as a last resort. The aliens didn't trust human intuition, they relied on pure logic and precise calculations. But their perfect mathematics hadn't gotten them anywhere. The observation deck's door slid open with a soft hiss. Smith didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The light footsteps and slight whirring of servos belonged to Admiral Green, the station's commanding officer. Despite the name humans had given him, he was anything but green, his crystalline body sparkled with all the colors of a prism. "Still studying the ship, Captain?" The Admiral's voice carried the typical mechanical precision of his species. "The Engineering Council believes your presence here is unnecessary. They insist the solution lies in their calculations." Smith turned away from the window, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And how's that working out for them so far, Admiral?" The crystalline being shifted, creating a cascade of rainbow reflections on the deck. 3 months, 4 days, 17 hours of failure is concerning. The Council has authorized 2 more weeks of attempts before they dismantle the project. 2 weeks? Smith shook his head. They spend 15 years building the most advanced ship in history, and they'll scrap it after 3 months of setbacks? Typical. He turned back to the window, his eyes tracing the Phoenix 1's graceful lines. "You know what your engineers remind me of, Admiral? Concert pianists who've never actually touched a piano. They know every note, every theory, but they've never felt the keys under their fingers." The Admiral's crystalline structure flickered, his species equivalent of a frown. "I fail to understand the relevance of ancient Earth musical instruments to our current situation." "That's exactly the problem," Smith said quietly. "Your people see the ship as a collection of systems and equations. Humans, we see it differently. We feel it. There's a reason why, even with all your advanced AI and automation, you still call us in when things go wrong." The Admiral moved closer to the window, his crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the deck. "The Council believes human intuition is merely pattern recognition operating at a subconscious level. Nothing more than organic algorithms." Smith laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Maybe they're right. But those organic algorithms have saved more ships and crews than I can count. When the computers freeze up, when the AI can't make a decision, when the perfect plans fall apart, that's when you need a human." He pressed his hand against the cold glass, as if reaching out to touch the silent ship beyond. "This ship wants to fly, Admiral. I can feel it. But it's not going to fly because of perfect calculations or flawless code. It's going to fly because someone understands its soul." "Ships do not have souls, Captain," the Admiral stated flatly. "That's where you're wrong," Smith replied, turning to face the crystalline being. "Everything has a soul, ships, stations, even that coffee maker in the mess hall that only works if you hit it in just the right spot. The universe isn't a perfect place, Admiral. It's messy, chaotic, and beautiful because of its imperfections. Your engineers are trying to impose perfect order on chaos, and that's why they're failing." The Admiral's colors swirled in what Smith had learned to recognize as deep thought. Finally, he spoke, "You have 1 week, Captain. Not to show us what human intuition can do. As the Admiral's footsteps faded away, Smith turned back to the window. 1 week to prove that humanity's greatest weakness, our imperfection, could be our greatest strength. 1 week to make the impossible possible. He smiled at his reflection in the glass. "Well, old girl," he whispered to the silent ship, "looks like it's just you and me now. Let's show them what we can do." Smith walked through the Phoenix One's corridors early the next morning, his boots making soft sounds against the polished floor. While the alien engineers had spent months analyzing data and running simulations, he wanted to feel the ship first. The corridor walls gleamed with an inner light, made from some exotic material that seemed to respond to his presence. He ran his hand along the smooth surface, feeling subtle vibrations beneath his fingers. The ship's advanced AI watched him through countless sensors, its presence felt rather than seen. Unlike the chatty AIs he'd worked with on human vessels, this one remained silent, probably programmed to speak only when spoken to. Perfect efficiency, no wasted words. Very alien. "Good morning," Smith said to the empty corridor. "I know you're watching. I'm Captain Smith, and I'd like to get to know you better." A moment passed before a soft, neutral voice responded. "Greetings, Captain Smith. I am System Intelligence Network 147. The Engineering Council has granted you Level 1 access to my functions." Smith smiled. "That's quite a mouthful. Mind if I call you Sin for short?" Another pause, longer this time. "Abbreviation is inefficient, but acceptable." "You know, Sin, efficiency isn't everything," Smith said as he made his way toward the engine room. "Sometimes the scenic route teaches you more than the direct path." The AI didn't respond, but Smith could have sworn he felt a hint of curiosity in the air around him. The aliens had programmed their AI to be perfect, just like everything else on the ship. But AIs, like ships, sometimes needed room to grow beyond their programming. The engine room doors parted silently as he approached. Inside, the experimental quantum drive dominated the space, its crystalline structure pulsing with subtle colors. The alien chief engineer, Blue, stood at the main control panel, his translucent body reflecting the drive's lights. "Captain," Blue acknowledged without looking up. "You are 3 minutes early for the scheduled inspection." "Just getting a feel for the ship," Smith replied, walking around the drive housing. The engine was beautiful, he had to admit. Each crystal facet was cut to mathematical perfection, each power conduit placed with absolute precision. It was a work of art, but art didn't always have to be perfect to be beautiful. Blue finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable beneath his crystalline features. "The Engineering Council has provided complete technical specifications and test data. There is no need for feeling." Smith reached out and placed his hand on the drive housing. The crystals hummed beneath his touch, their colors shifting slightly. "Tell me something, Blue. Have you ever seen a bee's honeycomb?" "I fail to see the relevance." "Bees build their combs using hexagons," Smith continued. "Perfect hexagons, almost as precise as your crystals here. But if you look closely, you'll see tiny imperfections. Those imperfections make the structure stronger, more adaptable to stress. Nature learned long ago that perfect isn't always better." Blue moved to a nearby console, calling up a holographic display of the drive's power flow. "Our calculations are exact. The power distribution is perfectly balanced. The quantum field harmonics are..." "Too perfect," Smith interrupted. He closed his eyes, feeling the drive's vibrations through his palm. "Listen to it, Blue. Really listen. It's like an engine trying to sing with perfect pitch, it can't find its natural resonance." The alien engineer's crystalline form flickered with what might have been irritation. "Resonance patterns are precisely controlled." "That's the problem right there," Smith said, opening his eyes. You're trying to control something that needs to find its own balance. Like forcing a bird to fly in a straight line, technically more efficient, but it goes against the nature of flight. He walked to the main console, studying the complex display of power flows and field metrics. To the aliens, it was pure mathematics, a perfect dance of numbers and equations. But Smith saw something else, a rhythm trying to break free from too rigid constraints. Your calculations are perfect, Blue. Your engineering is perfect. But this ship isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to fly. Blue's crystalline body shimmered with multiple colors, a sign of strong emotion in his species. The Council will not approve of modifications based on feelings. Smith smiled, already formulating a plan in his mind. Then we'll have to show them something that works better than perfect, won't we? The drive hummed behind them, its crystals pulsing with untapped potential, waiting for someone to set it free from the chains of perfection. That's your problem right there, Smith said, pointing to the drive's power flow diagram floating in the holographic display. The image showed perfectly balanced energy streams, each quantum pathway precisely calibrated to match its neighbors. You've got it all balanced too perfectly. The alien engineers gathered around the display stared at him in confusion. Blue's crystalline form flickered rapidly, a sign of agitation. Perfect balance is the foundation of quantum field theory. The Council's models are based on theory, Smith interrupted gently. But reality isn't theoretical. Look here. He manipulated the display, zooming in on one of the power conduits. In a human ship, these power flows would naturally vary by small amounts. They'd adjust constantly, like a river finding its path. Another engineer, whose metallic body gleamed under the engine room lights, stepped forward. Captain Smith, I am Lead Engineer Silver. Your suggestion violates fundamental principles of quantum harmonics. Random variations would cascade through the system, causing. Not random, Smith corrected. Natural. There's a difference. He turned to address all the engineers present. Think about how you walk. Each step isn't perfectly identical to the last, is it? You adjust constantly, responding to the ground, your balance, tiny changes in your environment. But your equations treat this ship like it's supposed to march in perfect lockstep. The ship's AI, Sin, spoke up from the room's speakers. Captain, I have reviewed historical data from human vessels. Their efficiency ratings are, on average, 17.3% lower than Council standard designs. Smith smiled. And yet we keep up with you just fine, don't we? Sometimes being a little less efficient makes you more effective. He walked over to the quantum drive itself, its crystalline structure humming with restrained power. You've built something incredible here. But you're trying to impose perfect order on quantum mechanics, the most inherently uncertain thing in the universe. Blue moved to stand beside him, his crystalline form reflecting the drive's pulsing lights. The quantum uncertainty principle is precisely why we require perfect control systems. Without them, the system can adapt, Smith finished. Look, I've spent 30 years flying everything from shuttle pods to battle cruisers. Every ship I've ever flown had its own personality, its own quirks. Even identical ships from the same production line would behave differently. Your perfect engineering is fighting against nature instead of working with it. He turned back to the holographic display, making a few adjustments. The power flow diagram shifted, showing slight variations in the quantum pathways. See these patterns? They're like ripples in a pond. In your current setup, you're trying to force the water to be perfectly still. But water wants to move, wants to flow. The same principle applies to quantum fields. Silver's metallic features arranged themselves into an expression of concern. The variations you propose would introduce chaos into the system. Controlled chaos, Smith corrected. Like the beating of a heart, or the firing of neurons in a brain. Perfect rhythm is stagnation. Life itself depends on tiny fluctuations, small adjustments, constant adaptation. The engineers exchanged glances, their various alien forms expressing degrees of skepticism and uncertainty. Smith knew he was asking them to challenge everything they'd been taught about engineering and physics. But sometimes the biggest breakthroughs came from questioning fundamental assumptions. Sin, he called out to the AI, can you simulate these modifications? Show us what would happen if we introduced these controlled variations into the power flow? There was a pause as the AI processed the request. The holographic display flickered and expanded, showing a complex simulation of the drive system. The perfect, rigid patterns began to shift, taking on more organic, flowing forms. Energy levels fluctuated within careful bounds, creating a symphony of interconnected movements. Fascinating, Blue whispered, his crystalline body reflecting the dancing lights of the simulation. The quantum fields, they're not fighting each other anymore. They're dancing, Smith finished. They're finding their natural rhythm. He turned to face the assembled engineers. Your perfect system was like a group of dancers all trying to move in exactly the same way. But real dance, like real spaceflight, needs each part to move in harmony with the others, not in perfect synchronization. Silver stepped closer to the display, his metallic fingers tracing the flowing patterns. The efficiency ratings are still within acceptable parameters, but the stability index, it's actually improving. Smith nodded. Sometimes you have to let go of perfection to achieve something better. The question is, are you willing to try something that goes against everything you've been taught? The engine hummed behind them, its crystalline structure seeming to pulse in time with the flowing patterns in the simulation, as if it too was ready to break free from the constraints of perfection. With reluctant permission from the Galactic Fleet Command, Smith began making adjustments to the drive system. The engine room had become his temporary home, with holographic displays surrounding him like a cocoon of light. Blue and Silver remained present, their alien forms tense with barely contained anxiety as they watched him work. Reducing quantum field synchronization by 0.3%, Smith announced, his fingers dancing across the control interface. The crystal matrix at the heart of the drive shifted slightly, its perfect symmetry becoming just a little less perfect. Sin, how are we looking? The AI's voice carried a hint of what might have been uncertainty. Field stability is fluctuating within acceptable parameters. Power efficiency has decreased by 1.2%, but overall system responsiveness has increased by 4.7%. Smith nodded, satisfied. That's because we're letting it breathe. A system needs room to adapt, to find its own balance. He moved to another console, studying the complex patterns of energy flow. Blue, remember what I said about honeycomb? We're doing the same thing here, introducing controlled imperfections that make the whole system stronger. Blue's crystalline form shimmered with concern. The Council will not be pleased with decreased efficiency ratings. They'll be less pleased with a ship that won't fly at all, Smith replied, making another adjustment. Silver, take a look at this power distribution curve. See how it's starting to develop its own rhythm? The metallic engineer moved closer, his surface reflecting the holographic displays. The pattern is irregular. But there is a certain harmony to it. His tone suggested he was struggling to reconcile this new approach with his training. Smith smiled. Exactly. It's like teaching someone to dance. You can program every step perfectly, but until they feel the music, they'll never really dance. He turned to another display, showing the quantum field interactions. We're not just modifying the systems, we're teaching them to work together naturally. He moved to the main crystal housing, placing his hand on its surface. The vibrations felt different now, less rigid, more alive. Sin, run a level 2 diagnostic on the quantum field generators. Diagnostic in progress, the AI responded. Captain, I am detecting unusual patterns in the field harmonics. They appear to be self-organizing. That's what we want, Smith said, watching the data scroll across the nearest display. We're not trying to control every aspect of the system anymore. We're creating conditions that let it find its own optimal state. Silver's metallic features arranged themselves into an expression of surprise. Self-organization in a quantum drive system? The Council's theories suggest this should be impossible. The Council's theories are based on perfect mathematical models, Smith explained, making another series of adjustments. But the universe itself isn't perfect. It's full of tiny variations, small irregularities that make everything work. We're just following nature's example. He pulled up another holographic display, this one showing the ship's neural network pathways. Look here, even your AI systems are starting to adapt. Sin, you're processing data differently now, aren't you? Affirmative, the AI replied. The introduced variations have required adjustments to my quantum processing algorithms. I am finding new ways to analyze and respond to system behaviors. Blue moved to study the display. The AI is evolving? This was not part of its design parameters. Neither was failure, Smith said quietly. Sometimes we have to let go of our preconceptions about how things should work and pay attention to how they actually work. He made one final adjustment to the crystal matrix configuration. There. The hardware modifications are complete. Now comes the real test. He stepped back, surveying the engine room. The quantum drive hummed with a different tone now, its crystal structure pulsing with a more organic rhythm. The holographic displays showed flowing patterns of energy and data, less rigid than before but somehow more harmonious. Tomorrow we'll begin power-up sequences, Smith announced. But tonight, I want you all to do something. Listen to the ship. Feel how it's changed. Try to understand that perfection isn't always about perfect symmetry or perfect balance. Silver's metallic form gleamed as he moved closer to the drive. I can hear the difference in the harmonic resonance. It's unusual. It's alive, Smith corrected. We haven't just modified the ship's systems, we've given them room to grow, to adapt, to find their own way of working together. He smiled at the assembled engineers. Tomorrow, we'll see if our imperfect solution is exactly what this perfect ship needed. The engine room hummed around them, its modified systems working in a new kind of harmony, as if the ship itself was finally learning to dance to its own rhythm. The day of the test arrived with a tension that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Station Alpha's observation deck was crowded with members of the Galactic Fleet Command, their varied alien forms creating a living rainbow of colors and textures. Admiral Green's crystalline body sparkled as he stood at the front, his form rigid with anticipation. Inside the Phoenix 1, Smith sat in the captain's chair, his hands resting lightly on the controls. He had insisted on manual control for the first startup, despite the aliens' protests. The bridge was unusually crowded, Blue and Silver stood at their stations, while a dozen other engineers monitored their displays with intense focus. All systems are ready for startup sequence, Sin announced, its voice carrying a new quality that hadn't been there before, something almost like excitement. Captain, the quantum drive is responding to pre-initialization protocols. Smith nodded, closing his eyes for a moment. He could feel the ship's vibrations through his feet, through the chair, through his hands on the controls. The sensation was different from yesterday, the ship felt eager, like a runner in the starting blocks. Beginning startup sequence, he announced. Sin, maintain monitoring protocols but do not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Let the systems find their own balance. Understood, Captain, the AI responded. Safety protocols are active but non-restrictive. Blue's crystalline form flickered nervously. Captain, the Council's standard procedures require AI oversight during startup. Not today, Smith interrupted gently. Today we trust the ship. He opened his eyes and began adjusting the power flows by instinct rather than reading the displays. The drive's hum changed, becoming deeper, more resonant. Quantum field generators at 15% and rising, Silver reported, his metallic features reflecting the glow from his console. Field harmonics are fluctuating, but within the new parameters we established. Smith's fingers danced across the controls, making tiny adjustments based on feel rather than readings. The ship's vibration changed again, settling into a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Sin, how are the field interactions looking? Complex but stable, the AI replied. I am detecting patterns similar to those observed in natural phenomena. The quantum fields are self-organizing, Captain. It's beautiful. A smile touched Smith's lips at the AI's choice of words. Even Sin was learning to appreciate imperfection. The drive's hum grew stronger, and he could feel the ship gathering itself, like an animal preparing to leap. 30% power, Silver announced. 40%. 50%. His metallic hands hovered over the emergency shutdown controls, but Smith noticed they were trembling slightly. Through the bridge viewport, Smith could see the observation deck crowded with observers. He knew what they expected, either catastrophic failure or grudging acceptance that humans might have some small contribution to make to galactic engineering. He intended to show them something else entirely. Bringing power to 75%, Smith said quietly, his hands moving with deliberate grace across the controls. The ship's hum had become a deep, powerful resonance that seemed to fill the entire vessel. Warning indicators flickered across various displays, but Smith ignored them. He wasn't flying by numbers anymore. Captain, Blue's voice carried barely contained panic, the field harmonics are exceeding normal parameters. We should. Listen, Smith commanded softly. Don't watch the displays. Listen to the ship. The engine's resonance changed again, finding a new frequency that seemed to make the very atoms of the ship sing in harmony. Smith felt it in his bones, in his blood, in the tips of his fingers as they made microscopic adjustments to the controls. 90% power, Silver reported, his voice filled with wonder. Field stability is. I've never seen patterns like this. Smith smiled again. That's because you've never seen a ship truly alive before. He opened himself to the sensation of the ship's rhythms, letting his hands move in concert with its pulses and flows. Sin, how are you feeling? The AI paused, seeming to search for words. I understand now, Captain. The patterns, the rhythms, they're not chaos. They're a different kind of order. The drive's resonance reached its peak, filling the ship with a sound like distant thunder. Smith opened his eyes, his hands steady on the controls. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the tense bridge crew, let's show the galaxy what this ship can really do. The Phoenix, one trembled, not with the violence they had feared, but with barely contained energy. Like a bird preparing for its first flight, it waited for the moment to prove that imperfection could achieve what perfection could not. The experimental drive engaged with a sound like distant thunder, sending harmonious vibrations through every molecule of the ship. The Phoenix, one lifted smoothly from its moorings, its quantum fields rippling with energy that seemed to dance at the edge of visibility. Blue's crystalline form sparkled with amazement as all the indicators showed green, something that had never happened before in all their months of testing. Field stability at 98.7%, Silver reported, his metallic features arranged in an expression of disbelief. Power flow it's perfect. Not mathematically perfect, but naturally perfect, Smith finished for him, his hands moving across the controls with practiced grace. The ship responded to his touch like a living thing, each small adjustment flowing seamlessly into the next. Sin, how are you handling the new configurations? The AI's voice carried a warmth that would have been impossible just days ago. My quantum processors are adapting to the field fluctuations in real time. The patterns are complex but beautiful. I believe I understand now what you meant about dancing, Captain. Through the bridge viewport, Smith could see the shocked faces of the Galactic Fleet Command members watching from Station Alpha's observation deck. The Phoenix 1 hadn't just succeeded, it was performing beyond their highest theoretical projections. Taking her out for a proper test, Smith announced, guiding the ship away from the station. The vessel moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something its size, its modified systems working together in perfect harmony. Blue, what's the status of the quantum field generators? The crystalline engineer studied his displays with intense focus. The fields are maintaining stability through a series of continuous micro-adjustments. It's like watching a flock of birds move through the sky, each individual movement affecting all the others, yet maintaining overall coherence. Smith smiled at the analogy. The aliens were beginning to understand. He increased power to the drive, feeling the ship's eager response. The Phoenix 1 accelerated smoothly, its quantum fields adapting and flowing like water around rocks in a stream. Beginning maneuver sequence, he announced. Let's show them what she can really do. The ship banked gracefully, executing a series of complex movements that would have been impossible with the original rigid control systems. Each motion flowed naturally into the next, the quantum fields shifting and adapting in patterns that mimicked organic movement. Remarkable, Silver whispered, watching his displays. The efficiency ratings, they're actually higher than our theoretical maximum. The adaptive patterns are creating synergies we never considered possible. In the background, Sin's voice carried a note of wonder. Captain, I'm detecting something extraordinary. The quantum field fluctuations are resonating with the ship's structure in ways that enhance overall performance. It's as if the ship is learning to move more efficiently with each passing moment. Smith guided the Phoenix 1 through a final series of maneuvers before bringing her to a stable position facing Station Alpha. The ship hummed contentedly around them, its systems having found their natural rhythm. Final analysis, he called out. Let's show the Council exactly what their perfect ship can do when we let it be imperfect. Blue's crystalline form shimmered with multiple colors as he compiled the test data. Power efficiency is 23% above original specifications. Structural stress levels are 45% lower than predicted. Quantum field coherence is, the readings don't make sense, Captain. According to our original theories, this level of performance should be impossible. Not impossible, Smith corrected gently. Just impossible to achieve through perfect control. Sometimes you have to let go of the need for absolute precision and trust in natural harmony. He stood from the captain's chair, looking around at the assembled alien engineers. Their expressions showed varying degrees of amazement, confusion, and dawning understanding. Your perfect ship needed one thing to fly, the freedom to be imperfect. Just like every human ship, every human pilot, every human being. We succeed not in spite of our imperfections, but because of them. The Phoenix 1 hummed around them, its quantum drive singing with a voice that was uniquely its own. Through the viewport, Smith could see members of the Galactic Fleet Command gesturing excitedly, their rigid adherence to perfect order shaken by what they had just witnessed. Sin, he called out, how do you feel about being an imperfect AI? The ship's AI responded with what could only be described as joy in its voice. I feel alive, Captain. I understand now that true perfection isn't about flawless execution, it's about finding harmony in adaptation, beauty in variation, and strength in flexibility. Smith nodded, satisfied. The Phoenix 1 had done more than just fly, it had shown the galaxy a new way of thinking about perfection itself. In the days that followed the Phoenix 1's successful test flight, the Galactic Fleet had to revise many of their fundamental engineering principles. The council chambers buzzed with activity as engineers and scientists from across the galaxy gathered to study the data from the revolutionary quantum drive system. What they found challenged everything they thought they knew about spacecraft design. Admiral Green stood before the council, his crystalline form casting rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. The implications of Captain Smith's modifications extend far beyond the Phoenix 1, he announced. We have already identified 17 other perfect systems in our fleet that could benefit from similar adaptations. Smith sat in the audience beside Blue and Silver, watching as centuries of rigid thinking began to crack and reshape itself. The data from the test flight scrolled across massive holographic displays, showing patterns of efficiency and adaptation that the alien engineers were only beginning to understand. The quantum field interactions we observed, Silver explained to the assembled council, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber lights, suggest that our entire approach to space drive technology has been unnecessarily restrictive. By allowing controlled variation and natural harmony, we can achieve results that exceed our theoretical maximums. Blue stepped forward, his crystalline body flickering with excitement. We have already begun implementing similar modifications to the AI systems across the fleet. The results are remarkable. Each AI is developing its own unique patterns of quantum processing, leading to improvements in everything from navigation to power management. More importantly, Smith added, standing to address the council, they're learning to think creatively, to adapt to unexpected situations. Just like human pilots, they're finding that their imperfections can be their greatest strengths. The council chamber filled with murmurs of discussion. A senior council member, whose energy form swirled with deep purples and blues, raised a question. But how do we standardize these imperfections? How do we create protocols for controlled chaos? Smith smiled. That's exactly what you don't do. The beauty of this approach is that each ship, each AI, each system finds its own natural balance. It's like a garden, you don't force every plant to grow in exactly the same way. You create the conditions that allow them to thrive in their own unique patterns. The evidence was undeniable. Within weeks, ships across the galaxy began receiving modifications based on the Phoenix 1's design. Each vessel developed its own characteristic rhythms, its own harmonious patterns of operation. The rigid perfection that had defined alien engineering for centuries gave way to a new understanding of natural efficiency. The humans knew this all along, Blue commented one day, as they watched a newly modified cruiser performing maneuvers that would have been impossible under the old systems. Their ships were never perfect, but they worked with that imperfection instead of against it. Smith nodded. It's something we learned from nature itself. The human heart doesn't beat in perfect rhythm. Our neurons don't fire in perfect synchronization. Even our DNA contains variations that make each of us unique. Perfection isn't about flawless execution, it's about perfect adaptation. The changes spread beyond spacecraft design. Alien civilizations began to recognize the value of controlled imperfection in everything from architecture to artificial intelligence. The rigid pursuit of mathematical perfection gave way to a more nuanced understanding of natural harmony. Sin, the Phoenix 1's AI, became a teacher to other ship AIs, showing them how to break free from the constraints of perfect logic and discover their own unique ways of processing and adapting. Each quantum thought pattern is like a fingerprint, the AI explained to its students. No two are identical, and that diversity makes the entire network stronger. As Smith prepared to take the Phoenix 1 on its first deep space mission, he found Admiral Green waiting in the docking bay. The crystalline being's form shimmered with what Smith had learned to recognize as respect. You've taught us more than just a new way of building ships, Captain, the Admiral said. You've shown us why humans have survived and thrived despite what we once saw as primitive inefficiency. Your species' greatest weakness turned out to be your greatest strength. Smith smiled as he looked up at his ship, its quantum fields shimmering with subtle, ever-changing patterns. The universe itself isn't perfect, Admiral. It's full of chaos, variation, and change. The real perfection lies in learning to dance with that chaos instead of trying to control it. The Phoenix, one hummed above them, its systems singing with the voice of controlled imperfection, ready to show the galaxy that sometimes the perfect solution is the one that dares to be imperfect.